The gods are immortal and invincible. United, they are capable of beating the most malicious divinities. Disunited, the world would return to the chaos from which it came. These divinities are proud, susceptible, vain. They possess both cunning and intelligence. And when they use these two qualities, it is usually to quarrel, to plot, to betray. Deep down, the gods are not that different from mortals. They succumb to the same two passions, love and hate. However, one day a god appeared who was wiser, more rational than the others, capable of uniting instead of dividing, of constructing peace rather than preparing war. A god profoundly planted on the side of reason, as opposed to those who let themselves be guided by their passions. This god came to the world, but this god was a goddess, Athena. For an exceptional divinity, an exceptional birth. Zeus's first wife was the nymph Metis, whose name signifies both prudence and cunning. Despite a few storms brought about by the king of the gods' infidelity, this was a happy couple. And then one day, two other divinities, Gaia, the earth, and Uranus, the sky, came and knocked at the door of the master of Olympus. They delivered a worrying prediction. After having given birth to a girl, Metis would have a boy, and this boy would surpass his father in cunning and in power, and would eventually dethrone him. Zeus is a king with no rival, and he intends to stay that way. He conquered his throne through fierce fighting and has no intention of sharing it, even less of conceding it. So when Metis was on the point of giving birth, Zeus, who was never short of a trick, set his wife a challenge. Just how great a metamorphosis was she capable of? Metis, far from imagining what was really going on, entered into the game. She went through a series of incredible transformations until, urged on by Zeus, she turned herself into a drop of water. Zeus congratulated her, applauded, and swallowed her. Delighted with the trick he had played, the king of the gods went about his business. A short time later, Zeus was overcome with atrocious headaches. So sharp was the pain that he called upon all the divinities of Olympus for help. To ease his father, his son Hephaestus, god of blacksmiths, struck him a terrible blow on the head with his sledgehammer. Immediately, wonder of wonders, a young girl, armed and helmeted, sprang out of the crack. She gave a deafening war cry, which echoed around Olympus. The gods were struck with fear. The rivers and the seas swelled up with roaring waves, and the sun reined in his fire horses. Athena had just been born. Athena possesses the prudence and wisdom of her mother Metis, but also the intelligence of her father Zeus. She is double. She is a woman, but she is dedicated to the game of war, which, for the Greeks, is men's business. For Zeus, she is and will always be his favorite child, who will be forgiven everything. Zeus entrusts the river god Triton with Athena's education. Triton himself has a daughter, Pallas. Very quickly, the two young goddesses become inseparable. But one day, during single combat training, as Pallas prepares to strike Athena, Zeus, afraid for his daughter, steps in. Surprised by the appearance of the king of the gods, the unfortunate Pallas drops her guard and receives a terrible blow from Athena. An involuntary blow, but a fatal one. Athena's sadness is immense. She has lost a sister. So, as a sign of her pain, she decides to place her friend's name before her own. Henceforth, she will be called Pallas Athena. Athena grows up. Her beauty dazzles all those who meet her. But Athena remains insensitive. She fends off all advances. She is a virgin and she intends to stay that way. One god, however, relentlessly pursues her, Hephaestus. Hephaestus is the ugliest, the most graceless of all the gods. A limping blacksmith, it is he who, with a blow of his sledgehammer, brought Athena into the world. He is even more in love with her since being recently abandoned by his wife, Aphrodite. One morning, Athena comes to Hephaestus's forge. She has come to order some weapons from him. Hephaestus is quick to tell her that he will accept no payment, that he will carry out his work just for the love of her. Flattered, Athena accepts. A few days later, the goddess comes to collect her weapons. Hephaestus at first greets her amicably, then suddenly, fired with desire, unable to control himself, he throws himself on Athena and tries to abuse her. In reality, Hephaestus, who does not usually behave so crudely, is the victim of a dirty trick played by no other than Poseidon, Zeus's brother. Poseidon and Athena have always been fierce rivals, and Poseidon has used Hephaestus to cause the goddess harm. A few hours earlier, he had led him to believe that Athena was on her way to the forge and that she was longing for Hephaestus to ardently court her. Athena struggles, pushes away the blacksmith, and takes flight. Despite being lame, Hephaestus manages to catch up with her and again tries to take her. He is so clumsy that he tears her tunic. He catches sight of the goddess's naked body in all its splendor. Hephaestus is captivated. Athena takes advantage of his confusion to free herself, but just as she is about to escape, a long jet of semen lands on her thigh. In disgust, Athena grabs a piece of woolen cloth, wipes herself, and throws the cloth on the ground. But as the cloth hits the floor, it fertilizes Gaia, the Mother Earth. Gaia is now pregnant through the desire of Hephaestus. And sometime later, Gaia gives birth to a child. It is a strange creature, half man, half snake. Horrified, Gaia announces that she refuses to bring up the child. But not to worry, Athena will look after him. She adopts him. She names this child, sprung from the ground, Eryctonius, which signifies autochthonous. She hides him in a sacred basket, which she gives to one of her high priestesses, with orders to take great care of him. But one day, as she returns from a feast, carrying the sacred basket in which the young Erectonius is dozing, her two sisters, burning with curiosity, lift the lid of the basket. When they see the snake-tailed child, they panic, scream in terror, and throw themselves from the top of the Acropolis. Athena races forward, and taking the child from its makeshift cradle, she carries him to safety within the walls of her temple. For days on end, she brings him up with so much love that everyone who sees them is convinced that the goddess is his real mother. At that time, the gods lived in their palaces on Olympus, but there were no cities on Earth which were exclusively dedicated to them. Zeus felt that this error should be immediately rectified. He calls all the gods together and tells each of them to choose a town in which men will worship them. One single city for each god. Each of them makes their choice. Apollo chooses Delphi. Ares takes Sparta. Aphrodite settles on Corinth. Even the solitary and ferocious Artemis decides to choose a town. It will be Ephesus. But when Poseidon and Athena's turns come around, both claim possession of Attica. The tension mounts. Seeing his brother and his daughter arguing more and more violently, Zeus decides that the king of Attica, the wise Cecrops, will be the arbitrator in this conflict. Cecrops is a good sovereign. He has forbidden human sacrifices. He has made his region the most civilized country in the world. He has established monogamy, marriage, and has created the first law courts. And, something unheard of, not only has he given men the right to vote, but he has given it to women too. Cecrops does as Zeus wishes. He retires to his palace. A few hours later, he reappears and declares that the patron of the town will be the god who gives man the most useful gift. Poseidon is convinced he will win. The god of the oceans aims his trident at the ground and makes a magnificent water spring appear. The salt water flows across the arid plains. He offers the inhabitants of Attica a sumptuous lake, a sort of gigantic swimming pool in which men can take their leisure and practice the water sports which they love so much. Then he tops off his gift by offering Cecrops himself a splendid black stallion, a magic, reputedly invincible warhorse which springs from the spray. Athena considers carefully. With a wave of her hand, she makes a tree grow out of the earth. An immense tree with silver branches and a knotted trunk. An olive tree. An olive tree whose leaves, she proclaims, will never fall, not even when winter comes. This tree, she declares, will bear fruit that you will press when it is fully ripe. It will feed you, you and your children, and your children's children. This tree will be a symbol of the peace and fertility that I grant you. Under the watchful eye of Themis, the goddess of justice, the inhabitants of Attica begin to vote. And it is the women's votes which tip the divine balance in favor of Athena. Poseidon flies into uncontrollable rage. In revenge for this humiliation, he determines to submerge Attica beneath the waves. But Zeus, who has attentively followed the ballot, forbids him. So, the Lord of the Oceans leaves Olympus. Full of bitterness and hatred towards Zeus's daughter, he plunges into the abyss and returns to his palace, where he shuts himself away to consider some fresh revenge. The logic of the inhabitants of Attica is simple. Poseidon offers them entertainment and war. Athena offers them peace and agriculture. And in homage to the goddess, they decide that the place will henceforth be called Athens. And her own son, Eryctonius, will be one of the first kings to reign over the city. Athena dedicates herself to men's happiness. Naturally enough, she becomes the protectress of heroes. She plays a major part in the success of their exploits. Without her precious help, Perseus would never have managed to beat the horrible Medusa, whose scowling face now decorates Athena's shield, a gift from the heroic Perseus to his protectress. During the Trojan War, Athena takes the Greeks' side and gives them the idea of the wooden horse. Later, she helps Ulysses to return to Ithaca. It is she who, disguised as the wise mentor, guides the young Telemachus in his efforts to trace his father. And she too, who one evening allows Prometheus to secretly enter Olympus so that he can steal fire, which he takes back to Earth to give to mortals. Indeed, it is Athena who inspires mortals to be audacious and clear-headed, giving them a new form of bravery, guided by reflection and cunning instead of disorganized, blind fury. Athena, goddess of war, appears to mortals as the opposite of her brother Ares, who is also god of war, but a god of carnage and of blood. Athena, contrary to Ares, puts intelligence in the service of war in order to bring about peace, as opposed to the extermination of the enemy. In time, Athena also becomes protectress of the state, guarantor of the equity of laws and their correct application. But she quickly realizes that without prosperity, laws alone are not enough. So, in order for men's well-being to develop, she gives them the plough and the yoke for their oxen. She also teaches them numbers. She instructs women in the culinary arts, as well as weaving and spinning. She equally passes on the intricacies of shipbuilding, how to work wood, polish planks, and assemble the different elements of the structure. It's in this way that she oversees the construction of the Argo, in its time the biggest ship ever built, aboard which Jason and his sailors would go to retrieve the famous Golden Fleece. Once, only once, Athena felt jealous of someone else. It has to be admitted, it was concerning an artist who was sorely lacking in humility. Her name was Arachne. She was the daughter of a rich cloth merchant. Arachne had become a true expert in the refined art of weaving. She produced magnificent embroidery, thinking up motifs each more beautiful than the previous, creating veils and dresses of reportedly incomparable splendor. So much so that her fame reached the ears of Athena, who decided one fine day to check out for herself the talents of this young prodigy. Athena took the disguise of an old gray-haired woman and went to visit the young girl. To her great surprise, she discovered an arrogant and boastful individual who claimed that no one in the world could spin as well as her. And to crown this tactlessness, she added, no one, not even the goddess Athena. Athena at first took this attitude for adolescent bragging. She benevolently advised Arachne to take back her words and pay homage to the goddess. But Arachne, caught up in her own enthusiasm, persisted. Yes, she felt capable of beating the powerful Athena if she ever dared to take her on. And promptly insisting that she was going to prove it, she ran her fingers the length of the thread. The loom chattered, and little by little the motifs appeared. Arachne had chosen as her subject the love affairs of the gods and the metamorphoses which they frequently employed. When she had finished, Athena, still disguised as an old woman, inspected the work. There was nothing to be said. It was perfection itself. It was useless to compete. The work of the young Arachne was well beyond what she herself was capable of. The goddess was overcome with rage. She, who was usually so reasonable, smashed everything around her and stormed out of the room. When Arachne realized that the old woman was none other than Athena, she fell into despair. She had just committed an abominable sacrilege and deeply offended the person who she, nonetheless, cherished above all others. Racked with remorse, Arachne shut herself away in her father's attic and hanged herself. When Athena heard the news, she immediately regretted letting herself get carried away. And to pay homage to this excellent spinner who death had unjustly taken, she returned to Arachne's workshop and poured a magic balm over her corpse. Arachne's body began to shrink, until it was nothing more than a tiny belly from which were protruding spindly little legs covered in hair. In this way, murmured the goddess, you can remain hanging forever, since that was your choice. But you will continue your work as before, Arachne, in the form of a spider. Ever since, pursuing her fragile trade which a breath can destroy, Arachne eternally weaves her cloth. Watched over, like all craftsmen and artists, by the goddess Athena.